Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Yud Tet of Sefer Yeshayahu. We're beginning another prophecy about one of the other enemies of the Jewish people, Mitzrayim, and it's going to be as this series of Masaot, the series of burdens of the type of destruction that was taking place. This is the Masa Mitzrayim. What's unusual about this Perek, however, is that in the middle of the Perek, actually probably about 2/3 of the way down from the Perek, beginning with Pasuk Yud Chet, we all of a sudden switch gears and talk about the fact that Mitzrayim learns their lesson. And starting from Yud Chet and until Pasuk Chav Hei, we begin to talk about the fact that Mitzrayim begins to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when they worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then ultimately goodness will come upon them. And so this parak has somewhat of a different approach than some of the other parakim. There will be destruction. One last thing that I also want to point out is regarding the beginning of the parak, and it's something that's striking, especially because of Mitzrayim, because we know so much about Mitzrayim itself, and that is that when we deal with Mitzrayim, what ends up happening is that in the curses, from the curses, you can understand the greatness of what Mitzrayim had. And so, for example, within these curses, we're going to talk about the destruction of the Nile. Well, we now understand, obviously, that the Nile must have been one of the great resources of the Egyptian people. We also talk about the destruction or the ineptitude of their great advisors, because Mitzrayim also took great pride in their wisdom and in their culture and in their advancements and their technology. And so if they're being cursed, that which is the source of curses is typically that which you ultimately will discover to be the greatnesses or the perceived greatnesses that preceded it. It's very similar, by the way, when you come to questions of Shelot and Shuvot, of rabbinic responsa. By learning responsa, you can understand the challenges that a community had based on the kinds of questions you have. Here, based on the kinds of curses that are being presented, you now understand what were the points of pride of the communities itself. And so we start with the very first pasuk in the parak, Masa Mitzrayim. This is going to be the burden, the destruction of Egypt itself. Hinei Hashem rochev al avkal. God is riding on a light cloud. Now, when we're talking about God riding on the light cloud, what it means very simply is that we're saying this is something that is going to happen quickly. But not just quickly, it's going to be happening directly by God, which plays into something very interesting, which we'll see in a moment, and that is that it also plays off the fact of the last destruction of Mitzrayim. The last time Mitzrayim was destroyed, at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim, we talk about Vavarti Ba'eretz Mitzrayim, Balayla Hazeh. Hashem says, I am going to go into Mitzrayim, cross over Mitzrayim in that night. Uvechol Elohei Mitzrayim Yaseh Shvatim Ani Hashem. And with all of the gods of Egypt, I will create signs and symbols. And so here we're going to see that God is coming himself. Uva Mitzrayim, he arrives in Mitzrayim, V'na'u Elilei Mitzrayim Mipanav. And all of the gods of Egypt will tremble before him. Now, Elilei Mitzrayim is a phrase, the gods of Egypt. It seems to be very simple in and of itself, but Rav Schwab suggests that when we refer to a god as an Elil versus an El, then what's the difference between an Elil and an El? Rav Schwab says he uses German. He says an El, a god, is Gott. However, an Elil is a Gotzvet, which means like a little god. Okay, it's a diminutive form for God. And therefore, it's a way of mocking. Elilei Mitzrayim is a way of mocking the gods of Egypt themselves. It's almost like Rav Schwab's terminology is a childlike concept of God, meaning an idol or something that is false. And that's what he says. They're going to start shaking mipanav before God. Ulevav Mitzrayim yemas b'kirbo. And the heart of Egypt will melt inside. This is, according to many of the Meforshim, the Rashi, the Mari Kras say that this is because Mitzrayim all of a sudden had experiences like this. In their history, they remember the last time the Jewish God had visited them. And the last time the Jewish God had visited them led to their destruction, the deaths of the firstborn, all of these terrible things. And here, all of a sudden, once again, they're going to have that fear, and it's going to arouse it, and it's going to be even attacking their own gods. And at that point, v'sichsachti Mitzrayim b'Mitzrayim. Sichsachti, according to Rashi, according to Radak, says that there's going to be this inner strife. There's going to be a milchemet achim. There's going to be civil war. One Egyptian against the other are going to be fighting. And they're fighting not just those who are close to them, but those who are around them as well. Ir ba'ir, mamlacha b'mamlacha. City against city, nation against nation. Some of the Meforshim are troubled by this term mamlacha against mamlacha. But we remember that when it comes to mamlachot, it doesn't mean the confederation of all the nations. To take in modern times, that you had the Germanic states. In medieval times, you had over 300 Germanic states that created this Germany, the Ashkenaz itself, or even lahavdil elef havdalot, the United States, where we have individual governance, and yet within that individual governance, there's a larger government that takes place. So you have all of these pieces. So the mamlacha b'mamlacha is really not a problem. It could be, we could translate it as opposed to kingdom against kingdom. It could be governorship against governorship, region against region. That's also the same concept. Some mamlacha is something that has a ruler over it, but it doesn't mean it's the supreme ruler over the government. It could be a secondary government. Then nafka ruach Mitzrayim b'kirbo, and at that point, the spirit of Egypt is going to be emptied out from its midst. Ve'atzato avalea, and the wisdom or the advice will be swallowed up. Now, here Rashi suggests that Ruach Mitzrayim is not just the spirit of Mitzrayim, but Ruach Mitzrayim actually means the wisdom of Mitzrayim. Remember, as I started out, the idea being, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu going to attack? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to attack those things in Egypt that the Egyptians have the greatest pride and confidence in. Their greatest pride is that they are the wisest of people, their civilization. They will find the salvation from all these people, and they will lose all of that. The Ruach Mitzrayim, Rashi points out that the Ruach Mitzrayim, you can find a similar piece on this in Eov. You find it in Bamidbar, Ish Asher Ruach Bo. According to the Mari crowd, remember, we're trying to find a new leader to take over from Moshe. We're talking about a man whose spirit is within him. What does spirit within him mean? Does it mean in English he's a spirited guy? He's the person who jumps up on tables and sings miros. Ruach in that case is a person of wisdom, who has that wisdom within him. And so there, v'darshu el elilim ve'el ha'itim ve'el ha'ovot ve'el ha'idonim, and at that moment they're going to start turning to all of their gods. Now, some of them we know, Yidonim, we have already in the Chumash, we have the Ovot and the Yidonim. These are different kinds of sorcery that they employed. Itim is another variation on it. Itim are most likely the spirits of the dead that they will be turning to. And then when that happens, v'sikarti et Mitzrayim, I will, Rashi translated as trap Mitzrayim. Rashi suggests that the gimel, the chaf and a gimel actually are can be switched. Sikarti is like sagarti. Ibn Ezra actually notes this. He disagrees with it. He says yesh machlifin kaf bagimel. There's some people who just switch the two others, and he says no, that there's actually a word samach chaf reish, which means to close off, and he points back v'yiskiru mayanot tahom. That back in the time of Noah, we talk about the underground springs were closed up. Shadal says, no, this is really the kaf and the chaf. These are words that are very, very similar. I will close off Mitzrayim biyad adonim kasha, in the hands of harsh masters. Now, the word adonim is interesting. If you have another nation coming to conquer you, why don't you say Adon? Why is it Adonim? And so, according to Rashi, he says, not a big deal, that we use the plural, okay? It's commonly used, and he points out other places in Chumash. We have an Breshit like this in a couple of places. There's a place actually in Shemot as well, where Adonim means master. The plural and the singular form are there differently. However, the Malbim takes this very interesting turn on it. And the Malbim says, what's worse than a single despot who's ruling over you? Multiple despots. And the reason is you don't know which way to turn. You might be able to figure out this one evil ruler who has now conquered you and is oppressing you. You might be able to figure out how to deal with that one. But if you all of a sudden have a bunch of them, well, you do X for conqueror X. It may be the antithesis of what conqueror Y wants. So there will be this kind of oversight over you that it's impossible to deal with. There'll be petty tyrants over every part of the country, and they're going to be hard on you. Umelech az yimsholbam, and there will be a strong king over them. Ne'um Hashem Adon Hashem tzvakot, and this statement is a promise. It's a promise from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to close off something. Ne'um Ha'adon Hashem tzvakot. Ne'um. While Ne'um means it means a speech, a statement, Ne'um is also, by the way, if you ever look in a legal document, in a halachic document, where the witnesses sign, the beginning of the line is Ne'um, okay, that this is testified by, okay, and this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu's point is coming here. Don't think there's any way around this. This is definitively going to happen. So number one, the attack number one is going to be, initially, we're talking about they're going to be enslaved. They will not have the wisdom to be able to save themselves from that. Part number two now begins with Pasuk Hey. And in Pasuk Hey, we're going to have about 4 or 5 psukim where we're going to talk about the destruction of the great natural resource they have of the water of the Nile. Egypt exists off the water of the Nile. The overflowing banks of the Nile are the source of irrigation of fields. The way they're able to create dams with offshoots of the Nile, the way they were able to provide fish for all of their people to eat. And so at this point, we go, V'nishtu mayim mehayam, that at that point, the waters of the sea will recede, V'nahar yecharav v'yavesh, and the river is going to be dried out. Now, there are 2 levels to this, which Rashi points out. 2 levels is first, that the waters of the sea will recede, that there's going to be, because Egypt generally doesn't get rain and it depends on the Nile. Therefore, what's happening is, according to Rashi, he's comparing the defeat of the Egyptians to the drying up of their water supply, which will also, says the Radak, close off. The river will be dried out in parts, which means they're not going to have the fish, which was important for them to have as a supply for food. They're going to be completely at mercy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu at this point. Ve'ez nichu neharot, and at that point, the rivers are going to be abandoned. What does it mean, a river being abandoned? Since they're not going to have the water is not going to flow through, they're going to turn into mud, and then ultimately they're going to be useless, explains Rashi. Dalalu v'charvu yorei matzor. And at that point, the waters of the matzor, we'll get to matzor in a moment, the water is going to be dalalu, like the word dal, it's going to be impoverished, it's going to be missing yorei matzor. Now, the simple explanation, which many of the Meforshim take in terms of Yorei Matzor, is the rivers where they have created reservoirs. Matzor, like to hold off, like you place siege, you put a dam in someplace. The Dat Mikra says no. Yorei Matzor is another poetic form for the word Mitzrayim. We find it elsewhere in Tanakh as well. And so this is a poetic statement that the rivers are going to be dried out. All of the Egyptian water supply will be destroyed. Kana v'suf, that both the reed and another form of reed as well is going to be kamelu, are just going to be gone. They're going to be destroyed. There will be nothing left of them. It's going to be dried up. Kamelu means to be dried up. Arot al yaor al pi yaor. And then what's going to happen? Arot, interestingly, in this case, there's a machloket about what this word really means. One possibility is the Arot Al Yaor is going to be the lands that are around the rivers, which used to be lands that were, full of vegetation, are just going to be empty lands. Interestingly, there is a possibility that this is actually from the same word. If you remember, Arom ve'eryah, that we have the same shorish from there as well. Al pi Yaor, like we said, along this river banks, Arot Al Yaor, Al pi Yaor. V'chol mizra Yaor yivash nidaf ve'enenu. And anything that was planted by these rivers are going to dry up, will be blown away, and will no longer exist. So all of the pride of Egypt, all of their farmlands that they had, are being destroyed because you take away the water supply from them. Ervat, in this kind of case, it's according to the Mitzvah Zion, Arot doesn't just mean that. Arot, he suggests, comes from not Arom ve'eryah, not that it's missing, it's absent. He suggests that Arot Yaor, Al Yaor, that those things that have been firmly rooted within the fields around the rivers, even those kinds of things are being destroyed. Va'anu hadayagim, va'avlu. And the dayagim, the fishermen, are going to be mourning. Anu and avlu are both forms of mourning. We know the word anu for an onen person, for instance, aninut. Before a person, as close relative passes away, they're in the status of aninut. It's a form of mourning itself. And as a result, vanu hadayagim, the fishermen are going to be mourning. Why are the fishermen mourning? Fishermen mourning because there's no fish left. Va'avlu, and they're going to also be mourning in this sense. Now, according to the according to the Malbim, I'm sorry, it's two stages. Why do I have the repetition? First, the fishermen are mourning, and then you have Avalu, Kol Mashlichei B'Yor Chaka. He understands that this Ve'avlu is tied into the next phrase, that the mourning is going to apply to everyone who had put the hooks into the rivers. Anyone who tried to fish, uforsei michmoret, and also those who had spread out their nets, al pnei mayim umlalu. They will also be in a state of mourning. So all of the according to the Malbim, there are three stages: the plain old-fashioned fishermen, the ones who had a larger commercial enterprise, and ultimately the ones who were doing most of the fishing themselves. All three of these people will be, unfortunately, without fish to be able to do. They're all going to be mourning over their loss, and they're not going to be able to support the Egyptian economy any longer. You find this even nowadays sometimes where you have problems with fishermen. So you have the little guys who can't necessarily bring in the yield that they need to, but the big guys, the commercial fishermen, are able to do so. No one's going to be able to do it, it's saying, within the Egyptians. Uvoshu ovdei fishtim srikot. And at that point, voshu, in other words, the people who are working with the flax, the pishtim, they are the ones who are srikot, lisrok. Actually, they're combing the flax. What are they combing the flax for? They're combing the flax because they're making the necessary garments. Okay, but in this case, it's tied to the fishermen. They're making the nets. The people who are making the nets now are going to lose all hope. V'orgim chorai, and also those who are weaving the chorai. What are chorai? Chorai might come from the Hebrew word chor, meaning the nets. If you think about what a net is, it's a material which has a lot of holes in it. However, it's interesting, you'll find in the Dat Mikra and others, he said, no, chorai comes from the word, like the word chor karpas utchelet. It's a very fine material. Now, why is chor a very fine material? Because that comes from the Aramaic or other Semitic language. Chavar means white. So the purest of white materials is what chorai is. And as a result, the people who are now, the economies that are being affected, the ancillary economies, the people who are making the nets, but also the people who are making the finest of materials, they'll be without anything. They're going to be in this state of mourning. And that's the second step. First step is enslavement. Second step is going to be the destruction of Egyptian economy. Then, ach evilim sarei tzoan. I skipped the pasuk. I'm sorry. Oh, vayu shatoteha medukaim, and then ultimately the foundations shatoteha medukaim, the foundations of Mitzrayim will be destroyed. Now, what does it mean the foundations of Mitzrayim are going to be destroyed? On this, there is a machloket as well. The Shatotah, according to Rashi, just very simply, that what used to happen is they would go ahead and they would divert the water of the Nile. They would create reservoirs with dams. And within those areas, they would go ahead and they would have fisheries. Those are going to be destroyed. The foundations of those dams are going to be destroyed. Rav Schwab disagrees. Rav Schwab says that after this economic collapse, the foundations of Egyptian society are going to be destroyed. We're talking about not a specific wall, but the society itself. Why? They've lost their religion because their gods were useless. They've lost their government. They've lost any form of income that they could have, their textile and their fishing industries that they have. And as a result, Rav Schwab says, unemployment is rampant. No one's able to earn a living. All the foundations of society are being destroyed. And that, he explains, is the foundations. Kol osei sachar agmei nefesh. All of those who would normally be able to do sacharim. Now, Sachar, according it could be the place, Sachar, the place where you are going to be collecting the water, Sachar with a samach, okay, which you have, but it's also, you could have the play on words. If you think about it, look at this words, Kol osei secher agmei nafesh. All of the ones who are making the reservoirs, the collections, the agamim, the lakes of nefesh, which had living things in it. Dat Mikra says it's a play on words. Kolosei sachar, anyone who was making a living, their agmas nefesh, like there was an iron, okay, will have this sense of loss. It's an interesting possibility that the Dat Mikra suggests. Ach evilim sarei tzoan. Now, ach in this case is like ech. How could you, okay, you foolish ones, the officers of Tzoan, Chachmei Yoatzei Paro, the ones who are the advisors to Pharaoh, Eitzan Niv'ara, then what you're providing at this point is the Eitzan Niv'ara, you're providing for him a foolishness as your advice. You're not giving him anything intelligent to be able to work. Not just that, and you're bragging to Paro when you're doing all of these stupid things and you're suggesting all of these crazy ideas. You're saying, by the way, trust us. We have yichus. You know, we come from a long line of very, very smart people, and we are people who have the wisdom of antiquity behind us. Chachmei Kedem, one possibility is antiquity, the kings of long ago. The other possibility, though, is the kings of the East, who were also well known, you know, for their, the Mitzudot David says this is talking about the kings of the Eastern cultures who were well known for their wisdom as well. So right now, the Navi is actually mocking the advisors of Paro. How could you go ahead and say it? Rashi picks this up. He's talking about how arrogant these advisors were, that you're giving him stupid advice. Ayam eifo chachamecha. Where is chachamecha? Where are your wise people? Now, the Ibn Ezra says that if they were really so wise, they should have figured out what was going to happen. So where are your wise people? The Malbim actually says there's a difference between, if you notice, there's two words, ayam, which is aye, where, and eifo, and also eifo, which is where. He suggests, the Malbim suggests that aye talks about people who are close by. Apho are people who are even some that are far away, are supposed to be around, but they're not within the inner circle. And therefore, Yeshayahu is telling them, where are all of those who are supposed to be the king's advisors, the wise men of the king? But where are all the other people in the rest of the world who are able to help you? No one is here. That they should have been able to tell you what was going to happen. Where were they? No, Alu Saray Tzoan. The officers of Tzoan, these advisors, are foolish. Okay, it is from the term, like the same word, avil. Okay, it's these are people who are they're dumb. Not just that, nisu sarenov, and not just that, they've also they have caused the officers of Nof to believe in them. Nof is in English, we can refer to the city of Nof as the city, in English it's Memphis, not Tennessee, Memphis in Egypt, that this is it was the royal city in Egypt. So they fooled these people. Hit'u et Mitzrayim pinat shvateha. What they've done is they have caused Egypt to stray away from its cornerstone, pinat shvateha. Now, a cornerstone is ultimately the best place. If you think about it, the way, and this is pointed out by the Mitzudot and by others, when you build a building and you put down a cornerstone, the cornerstone of the building is supposed to be like the finest piece of stone. Why? Not only is it not only often is the beginning and you're celebrating it, but it's visible on both sides. See, I can take a brick or a stone that has one face and it's good. A one-face brick doesn't tell me what's on the other three. It doesn't have to be of the highest quality. But whenever I have the cornerstone, whether it's the bottom cornerstone or all the stones that go along the corner of a building, it's got two faces exposed. And this way, when we say they have caused the pinat shvateha, the cornerstone of Egypt, to stray away, what we're saying is we're causing the best of the people, the leadership of Mitzrayim, to have been led astray as well. Hashem masach bekirba. God went ahead and masach. Now, masach, interestingly, it can simply be, in this case, he poured into Mitzrayim, ruach iv'im. He poured into Mitzrayim this spirit of crookedness, confusion. Rashi says that actually it might be mental illness, that the people may have just gotten the shtut into their heads. They couldn't do it in any other way. Rav Schwab talks about the fact that all of this is being mentioned in a formulation almost by mixing in. It's like God is creating a drink for them. There's a potion that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is creating. V'hit'u et Mitzrayim b'chol ma'asehu. And he went ahead and he caused Mitzrayim to stray in all of its actions. Ki hita'ot shikur b'ki'o. Just like a drunk person will throw up and walk right through his vomit itself. That's the Radak's explanation. Or the Malbim says that they became so intoxicated with the belief that they were so smart and their wisdom could protect them in every way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused them to be like a drunkard who actually drinks his own vomit. That's the way the Malbim describes this as well. Rav Schwab has a piece here, and I'm just going to read it. I wrote it down directly. He says, as we have said, we will not know for sure what this nevuah means until it actually happens. Remember, we're always talking about these two pieces, that there's a historicity to it, that there's something in the history, but also it has to be eternal. So there's something that's talking about even later time. It is possible, he writes, that Mitzrayim here could be the United States, Russia, China, or any of the other world's great powers, or the whole world, or that matter, who will exist at the time of the fulfillment of this nevuah. This nation, group of nations, or the whole world will find itself in a great crisis, struggling for its very existence, but its leaders will be staggering about like drunks, unable to find the right solution which would ward off a national or global catastrophe. This is Rav Schwab.
Because this is a natural catastrophe, it's compounded with a natural catastrophe, compounded with an invasion.
Right. So you have,
and the invasion isn't doing the destruction. The destruction is divine.
Well, there's a divine piece to it.
You don't see the enemy destroying the land. It's the drying up of the Nile, all the natural resources are going.
Right, and we could, and you could take this, taking what Rav Schwab did, which was more generic, you could apply it to so many different things about, leadership in the world staggering around, not knowing what they're doing, natural disasters happening at the same time, wars occurring. Okay, you could just pick any day of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, depending on which side of the thing you want to look at. That it's all the Democrats' fault or it's all the Republicans' fault, whichever way you want to read about it. You could apply this to so many different pieces, which is why Sefer Yeshayahu is Sefer Yeshayahu and not just a history book that existed. Let's just go. Yeah. It was both. In other words, this is something we talked about last week a little bit, where what you find in all of these prophecies, next week it's going to be really big, is a piece that relates to the actual history of that time. But if it was only history of that time, then what ends up happening is it shouldn't be a sefer in Tanakh, because Tanakh's not just a history book. There has to be broader lessons. And so these nevuot live on like two planes simultaneously. They live within the history of the time where Yeshayahu was talking to the kings or talking to the people, but they also live as pieces of what will happen in the future at some future point. And so you have them both happening at the same time. Where you have the real problem, and next week's piece is, I was starting to work on it already. Next week's piece has a fascinating part because we now know a lot more history about what's happening in next week. And some of the things the Meforshim thought was the history of the time isn't the history of that time, and how you play it all in together, be able to work within the history, but still go beyond the history. So it's on both levels. V'lo yihiyeh. And now we move over to this piece. It's the last pasuk of this section. Okay, the last pasuk of the section of the wisdom of Egypt being lost. V'lo yihiyeh l'Mitzrayim ma'aseh asher ya'aseh rosh v'zanav kippah ve'agmon. There will not be anything there that will make sense that they will do. The rosh, the nav, okay, the kippah and the agmon. Who are they? Well, the Ibn Ezra, the Mitzudot talks about the different levels of society. Rosh are the elite of society. The Zanav, the tail, are the lower classes. Okay, the Kippah is the strong ones. The Agmon are the weaker ones, the reeds within all of this. Others say these are different levels of the advisors that they're going to have. That's the Radak. All different levels. That no one's able to do anything at this point. By Yom Ha'hu, on that day, Mitzrayim kanashim. This is definitely politically incorrect. You'll excuse me. Okay. On that day, the Egyptians will be helpless like the women. Now we're talking on a military piece, a political piece. Take it within the step itself. You understand what it means. I'm not going to get myself in any more trouble. Okay, because Yeshayahu is not going to get in trouble. V'charad ufachad mipnei tnufat yad Hashem tzvakot. And there will be on that day, when they see all of this destruction, or on the day, that's Ibn Ezra, or the Radak says, on the day when they see that Sancheriv, who attacks Egypt and Cush, will also attack Yerushalayim, and they see when he attacks Yerushalayim that he's going to fall, that on that day, all of a sudden, the people of Egypt are going to start wondering what's going on here. They're going to realize that something bigger, finally, they're going to start coming to this realization. By Yom Ha'u, they're going to see this Tnufat Yad Hashem, that God's hand is moving here. Asher hu meini falav. He's the one who's waving it over them. V'haitam. And this is the last pasuk of the destruction section. And at that point, the land of Yehuda will be for Mitzrayim a chagah. A chagam is actually the same as the word chakak. It's like the gimel and the kuf could mean, and it's going to be a source of fear. Now, why would the land of Yehudah be a source of fear? Well, on the one hand, you could say very simply that they're going to go ahead and they're going to see how Sancherib fell in Yehudah. They're going to see that he fell without war, and they're going to realize that God's on the Jewish side. And so they're going to be scared. They're going to be realizing, oh my God, what did we do? Now, part of the challenge of this explanation, by the way, will be within history, we see that there were actually alliances between Egypt and the Jewish people. Sometimes they were strong allegiances. Sometimes they actually were allegiances or alliances that were created that Egypt was trying to do and the Jewish people wouldn't agree to do, which probably was at this time. They're going to be fair. Kol asher yaskir otai elav yifchad. Every time they just hear this Jewish name, and every time that they're going to mention Jews, they'll get scared. Jews in the broader sense of Yehudah. Because of what God is doing to Mitzrayim, it'll cause this fear. So Mitzrayim has been destroyed. They were destroyed again. First, they were captured. They were conquered. Then their water supply was destroyed, which impacted all of their economy. Then their wise men proved to be fools. And then they see this fear. They're gripped by fear because they realize this is not just happenstance. This is God. And they see that God was good. The same enemy that they had, Sancherib, they see God is good to the Jews. And they're scared. Now, the response to the scare is the second half of this parak. Bayomahu, and there's going to be 4 Bayomahus on that day. Each one is going to introduce one more piece. The first piece is going to be, we're going to talk about cities that are going to start swearing by God, swearing allegiance to God. Then we're going to see that they're going to be actually offerings that they're going to make, the Egyptians are going to make to God. Then there's going to be some kind of bridge to Ashur. Now, bridge doesn't mean a physical bridge. Bridge means like a pathway straight to Ashur. And then there's going to be ultimately some kind of collection of the Jewish people, Mitzrayim and Ashur. Each of these pieces are going to take place. So the first Bayomahu, Yiyu Chamesh Arim Be'eretz Mitzrayim Midabrot Sfat Canaan. 5 major cities are going to start speaking the language of Canaan. Now, the language of Canaan, according to Rashi, is Hebrew. All of a sudden, they're going to start talking Hebrew. The Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, says no. That they would agree, and they would agree as well. They say that in Canaan, they spoke Ivrit. That was the language of Canaan. The Abarbanel, however, says, no, they're talking Canaanite. Now, whichever way it is, whether it's Lashon, whether it is specifically Sfat Canaan, that they're speaking the Canaanite language, which was a Semitic language, or they're speaking Hebrew itself, what it means is they're abandoning their culture and beginning to imitate the culture of the land of Yehudah. Maybe not the Jews directly, but definitely the land of Yehudah. V'nishba'ot laHashem tzvakot. And they're going to start taking an oath in God's name. Ir haHeres ye'amer la'achat. The city of Heres will be said to be one. We don't really know what this means. So we have a whole bunch of theories. Ir haHeres, some suggest, is talking about Ir haCheres. Ir haCheres is the city of the sun. Rashi talks about Beit Shemesh, is based on a Targum Yonatan. That will be, Beit Shemesh will be one of them. Now, what is Beit Shemesh? Beit Shemesh is not the Beit Shemesh we know. Beit Shemesh would be referring to Heliopolis, which was one of the major cities in Egypt. And so they're saying this is going to be affecting, even of those 5 cities, one of them is going to be this major city of Heliopolis. Shadal rejects this very strongly, and Shadal rejects this because he said if it wanted to say Beit Shemesh, it should have said Beit Shemesh. The fact that it says that it talks about Ir haHeres doesn't seem to be, okay, now I got to go Ir HaHeres to be Ir HaCheres, and then Ir HaCheres is Beit Shemesh, and Beit Shemesh is Heliopolis. It's a little too far for Shadal. Modern commentary says a little too far, and he would disagree with this. There is another approach with the Radak and the Mitzudat David take, and they say no. What they're saying is they're taking an oath to God that if any one of their 5 cities abandons the Jewish God, it will be Ir HaHeres. It will be destroyed. That's the way they take it. The Shadal proposes differently. Shadal says, no, Ir HaHeres is not talking about, we're now talking, this whole section of the prophecy is all good stuff. So why would it include a threat that we're going to destroy you? We should be talking about happy things. And he says the happy thing was that one of the cities was a city that had once been destroyed. It was known as Ir HaHeres, and now it's been rebuilt. And since it's now been rebuilt, therefore, it's one of these 5 cities. Whatever it means, it's there. But what we are seeing is they're beginning to try to imitate the Jewish people. Yeah.
So Pasuk Yud is a direct result of Pasuk Yud
100%.
because they saw that great, amazing victory of God.
Right. And they're scared. And by the way, if you think about it, it's analogous to what happened, if you remember, not too much at about the same time, actually, when the Assyrians brought in the Kuthians, the Kutim, into the northern section of Eretz Israel as part of the population exchange. And they, at that time, began to fear because they were being attacked by lions. And therefore, since they were being attacked by lions, they converted to the god of the land, the Gerei Arayot. And there's a machloket over all of the years, were they Jews or not? These are the Samaritans. These are the ancestors of the Samaritans we have today. Were they considered or not? We learned in Ezra and Nehemiah, we learned that we rejected them. At that time, they were not too happy. They worked against us with the Persian Empire. But the fact that people start seeing what's going on, and because of what they're seeing, they're afraid, and they begin to adopt the Jewish culture or Jewish identity of some nature, makes sense. We've seen this before. Then and it will be at that point an oath and an aid. Now, the oath and the aid, it means very simply that they're going to begin. I'm sorry, keep on skipping. I'm sorry. And then there's going to be an altar for God in Eretz Mitzrayim, and they're also going to put up a matzeva right near the boundary, to Hashem. Now, this is possibly the Mizbeach LaHashem. Rashi and others talk about it. This might be talking about Onias's temple, Beit Chonyo, which we talk about in a number of different places. Chonyo, according to Chazal, was son of I'm losing my train of thought. Chonyo was the son of Shimon HaTzadik, right? Shimon HaTzadik. He was a Kohen. He left Yerushalayim. He moved down to Mitzrayim in a place called Leonatopolis, the city of lions. He built a Beit HaMikdash. He built another Beit HaMikdash, and they were offering sacrifices there. There's a lot of machloket in Chazal about what the status of that place was, what the status of the tefillot in those places were. They existed from the 2nd century BCE and until the 1st century. If you look at the map that I gave you, Leonatopolis is actually located here where it says Tel Al Yehudaya. The mound of Al Yudaya, it's located within another city that you have there as well. If you look immediately, by the way, to the south of it, you'll notice that there is a city there called Ir HaHeres. There may have really been the city Ir HaHeres that's following the approach, Shadal and others, that this was talking about a real place. And if you look, you see the other places we know. Nof, Memphis is right here, a little further south in the part of the Delta. This is lower, the Delta is the lower Egypt, this is the higher. But ultimately, all of these cities, we know where they are nowadays, and they're able to help us out. And we've actually found in the Tel Al Yehudaya, they have found remains, archaeological dig of something that was a temple there. And it's talked about in Chazal as well. It's an interesting piece that you had there. V'hayala ot, Ula'ed Lashem Tzvakot Be'er Mitzrayim. And this Mizbeach is going to be for them this symbol. It's going to be a sign, a symbol within Mitzrayim. Ki tziaku el Hashem mipnei lochatzim. That when they're going to cry out to God against about oppressors that are oppressing them, what's going to happen? God is actually going to save them. When the Egyptians start praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God is going to save them from their oppressors. It's actually pretty good news. They're going to build these temples. It's going to be to Hashem. Now, exactly what it was, I'm going to avoid because we don't know exactly what it was. V'noda Hashem l'Mitzrayim. And at that point, we say, God is going to be known. God is going to be known to the Egyptian people. V'yad'u Mitzrayim et Hashem b'yom hahu, and they will know God. V'avdu zevachu bincha, they're going to be offering to God. They will worship with God with sacrifices and with menachot. They're going to be bringing, this is the Radak, okay? And that v'nadru neder laHashem b'shilemu. And they're going to take their oaths to God and they will fulfill them. Now this, Rav Hirsch actually in the collected writings has a piece that this is the highest expression, he writes. Animal sacrifice, a high expression of allegiance to God would be found in those sacrifices. That this means not only did they recognize God, not only did they take on some of the attributes of the Jews, but they started worshiping God. Now, is it the way we're allowed to worship? No. But they were allowed to do it. V'nagaf Hashem et Mitzrayim nagof v'rafon. Now, God is going to still smite Egypt. He's going to hit them. And the way he's going to hit them where it's going to be a very hard hit, and then he will allow them to heal. The Maharsha explains on this idea, on this pasuk, that there's a difference between the way God punishes the Jewish people and the way God punishes the non-Jewish people. We're promised eternity. And therefore, before there's any punishment, God always creates the cure in advance. And the cure is there, and we are not going to be utterly destroyed. With the non-Jewish peoples, God will punish them. And if they do tshuva, God will provide for them the cure. If they don't do tshuva, then they'll disappear. And so as a result, he notes this, v'nagaf Hashem et Mitzrayim nagof v'rafo, and then he will heal them. Okay, it says the Maharsha, if it was the Jewish people, we would have the rafo in a different place. It wouldn't just be at the end as a consequence. V'shavu ad Hashem, they'll return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'natar lahem u'refaim. And at that point, and God will return to them, God will turn to them, God will accept their tefillot and heal them. By Yomahu, the next by Yomahu. Tia mesilami Mitzrayim Ashur. There's going to be a bridge between Mitzrayim, or a path is a better way of saying it, a path between Mitzrayim and Ashur, Uva Ashur Mitzrayim and Mitzrayim Bashur. And there will be back and forth between the two nations. Now, that's according to the Radak, the Maharikra. He says that ultimately there's going to be good relationships. They'll be traveling back and forth. Targum Yonatan disagrees. Targum Yonatan actually says that there's going to be a bridge and they're going to be fighting each other. Okay, there's going to be a pathway. They're just going to be back and forth, not good relations, but back and forth armies. Vabdu Mitzrayim et Ashur. And ultimately what's going to happen is that Abdu Mitzrayim et Ashur, Mitzrayim and Ashur, the et is like im. Mitzrayim and Ashur are going to be worshiping HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That both nations together will recognize what's happening. Bayomahu, and now the last step, on that day, Ye Yisrael Shlishiyah. The Jewish people will be considered the third party, the Shlishiyah. Now, what is the Shlishiyah? According to Rashi, it means there'll be now, as opposed to two superpowers of Egypt and Ashur, there are going to be three superpowers. There'll be the third. There'll be the third of the triangle. You'll have people will talk about Mitzrayim, Ashur, and Yehuda. All three of us will be there together. Another possibility, according to the Maharikra, is the Shlishiyah. We're going to be the intermediary between Egypt and Ashur. Because if you remember, there's a possibility that these nations may be at war. It's a possibility that they may need negotiators between them, even if they're doing commerce together. They'll need the Jewish people to be in between them. The Ibn Ezra says this Shlishiyah is that we're going to be the highest of the three. Okay. But we will be part of them. Yeah, Leah.
Does anyone associate the Yeshayahu with Trinity?
Not that I'm aware of. And the reason I wouldn't imagine it is, well, first of all, Yeshayahu was well before that period of time.
But there's some passages that.
Yeah, well, there's passages in Yeshayahu that the Christians want to use.
Right.
This isn't one of those passages that the Christians use, huh? Well, no, but I know, but it's yeah, it's a political piece. I haven't seen that. Okay.
If it's meant to be futuristic.
But it would have to be within the right kind of context. And also, we have an easy way of doing it because you can look up. I have a book at home that gives me all the psukim that the missionaries use. Okay, this isn't one of them. So that's another way to prove it. Okay, then it's a three-part way. Yeah, listen, there'll be three major. Just like we talk about the three nowadays, talk about the three major religions. Okay, talk about the major religions, and it will be ulashur bracha bekerav haaretz. Yisrael is going to be a blessing. Asher berchu Hashem tzvakot lemor, and he's going to say like God has blessed us. Baruch Ami Mitzrayim umasei yadai Ashur v'nachalati Yisrael. And God is going to bless. Now, what's the blessing going to be? Is the blessing going to be to the three nations? Or, and very simple, it could be that blessing all three of them. That's the way the Ibn Ezra, the Radak understands it. However, Rashi says it differently. Rashi says that really what it means is that Baruch Hami, that God is blessing the Jewish people who are his people. Okay, and he's blessing them, Mitzrayim umasei Yadai Ashur. He's blessing them when they were still in Egypt. And the work of my hands, Ashur, refers to the miracles that God will do against Ashur that will ultimately inspire the Jews to be able to do tshuva. So is this a bracha that's going to the three nations, or is it a bracha just going to the Jews? We don't know. There's a machloket on that as well. One thing I do know is that next week we'll have shir at the same time. And then we'll be taking a number of weeks off because those number of weeks are all going to be Yom Tovim. So we're going to hit a very brief parak next week that I'm not sure anyone knows what it means anymore. This, we have some hope of it, but we'll have a good time with it. And I'll see everyone next week. Yes.
As opposed to Ashur lasted as an empire, Ashur disappeared
Right.
as an empire. Mitzrayim. I don't know when we say that we do say Egypt.
Right.
We still call it Mitzrayim, but where is Ashur? We don't say that. We might say there's a Assyrian history, but we don't see Ashur.
Well, Ashur, because Ashur at that point was the major conquering country. Egypt was a superpower,
Right.
but it was never Moshel Bakipa. It was never one of those nations that tried to rule the entire earth, which you have with Ashur and you have with Bavel and you have with Rome. And so it's a different kind of context than the other nations.
So does this have a unique end because, and that is to say, it remains as a entity, whether empire or not, but it remains as opposed to Assyria.
Well, but
and
they're not,
Babel, which is
right.
there.
But the Egyptians are not the Egyptians of now are not the Egyptians of then.
Right.
Okay, they've been conquered, and so people are in their land, just like, whereas the Assyrians of now, by the way, are descendants of the Assyrians of then, which is interesting. So,
Interesting,
yeah, but it never was that same level of threat, the Egyptians. They threatened the Jews.
And I don't know this, the Egyptians
today perceive themselves as the heirs to a majestic empire.
I don't
Don't
know.
know.
I don't know.
I remember a story that a friend of mine told me once, because it came about in the late in life. And she had a son that was in business, went on a business trip to Egypt. And they provided him with a tour guide, and the tour guide says, here is where the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea. And this non-believing son said, I don't believe in that stuff. And the tour guide said, you don't believe in that? Everybody knows it's true.
Except when there were rabbis of the non-Orthodox faith who challenged the story. There was a famous one with David Wolfe in Los Angeles about
this one.
David Wolpe in Los Angeles, who said it was not literal.
Right.
Yetziat Mitzrayim was about 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, so all of those things. Okay, we'll see everyone next week.